I didn't recognize my father when he walked through my apartment door that Saturday in March 2021. Not because he looked that different, but because his arm was linked through hers, Rebecca's, like they were teenagers at a mall, and he had that expression I hadn't seen since my mother died. That look that says, "I forgot what it felt like to be happy." He was 68 years old. She was 41. They met at a yoga studio in Biltmore Village. That detail matters because I spent years trying to understand how a man who'd spent 43 years with one woman, my mother, could fall so completely for someone he'd known for 4 months. But yoga studios are designed to break down walls, aren't they? They're designed to make you vulnerable. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a structural engineer. I notice when things don't sit right. For the first 6 months after my father introduced Rebecca into our lives, I kept quiet because I'm the observant type, not the accusatory type. I watch. I take notes. I wait. My father, David Mitchell, had spent 38 years as the operations director for a regional logistics company based in Charlotte. When he retired in 2019, his severance package was $340,000, plus his pension of $4,200 per month. He owned our family home in Asheville outright, purchased in 1998 for $380,000, now valued at just over $2.1 million. He had $847,000 in investment accounts, and he'd always told me those accounts would be split equally between me and my brother, Michael. Michael lives in Denver. He's an anesthesiologist. He has money. That's important context. The first odd thing happened in July 2021. My father called me at my office on Merriman Avenue. I was working on the Asheville Renaissance Hotel renovation project, and he asked if I could recommend a family law attorney. "A family law attorney?" I asked. "Dad, are you?" "Rebecca and I want to make sure our paperwork is all in order," he said. His voice had that careful tone, the one people use when they're apologizing in advance. I recommended Robert Chen from Chen and Associates. Good man. Thorough. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out for another 18 months, was that Robert Chen never actually met with my father. Rebecca had called his office directly, using my father's phone, and scheduled the appointment under a different name. By September 2021, my father's will had changed. The documents were filed through a different attorney's office on South Elm Street, someone named Patricia Valdez, who my father claimed he'd met at a UNC Charlotte business seminar. He hadn't. Rebecca met her at a networking event through a mutual connection at an insurance brokerage where Rebecca had worked for 3 years. The new will split his estate differently. Still equal between me and Michael, but with a crucial addition. Rebecca was granted power of attorney and named executor. More importantly, $250,000 of liquid assets were designated to Rebecca directly for her role as caregiver and companion during my retirement years. I found out about this change the way you find out about earthquakes, suddenly, and because the ground beneath you shifted without warning. It was November 2021. I was at my parents' house in Asheville for Thanksgiving. My mother had died in 2014, and Thanksgiving had become this annual obligation that felt heavy and necessary. I was sitting in the kitchen, the same kitchen where my mother taught me to make her pecan pie, and my father was upstairs with Rebecca. They were arguing, or not quite arguing. The conversation had that sharp-edged quality. "You said you'd ask her," Rebecca was saying. "You promised you ask her before making decisions about the house." I wasn't trying to listen. I was genuinely trying to focus on peeling potatoes, but their voices carried down through the heating vents. "Rebecca, I haven't decided anything about the house," my father said. "Yet, you haven't decided yet, but you're thinking about it and you won't include me." I went downstairs and found them in the living room. My father looked exhausted. Rebecca had that expression, the one I started calling her empathy face, where her eyebrows come together and she looks genuinely concerned about you, even though the concern is just performance. "Sarah," she said, turning to me with that face. "You're here, good, maybe you can help us think through something." I didn't say anything. I've learned that silence is often more powerful than words. "Your father has been thinking about adding an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, to the back of the property. It would give us more space, and it would be an excellent investment. The property could be worth an additional $300,000 to $400,000 with the right addition. An ADU, a separate unit on the property where she and my father could have their own space. Or, more likely, where she could monitor my father more carefully. I think, I said, very carefully, that my father should consult with a real estate attorney before making any major property decisions. Rebecca smiled. It was the kind of smile that has teeth in it. Of course, that's sensible. That night, I called Michael in Denver. It was 10 p.m. Mountain Time, and he answered immediately. "Have you talked to Dad about his will?" I asked. There was silence. Then, "How did you know?" So Michael knew. He'd known since August and hadn't told me. "He called me," Michael said. "Said he wanted to make sure Rebecca was protected. I told him to talk to an attorney. I didn't know he already had." "He didn't," I said. "Rebecca did." Michael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sarah, Dad's happy for the first time since Mom died. Maybe we should just let him be happy." That's when I realized I was alone in this, not in the physical sense, but in the sense that matters. Michael had decided happiness was worth more than clarity. I hadn't. Over the next 8 months, things accelerated. Rebecca became more present in my father's life. She was there every morning when he woke up. She prepared his meals. She managed his medications, a blood pressure medication and a low-dose aspirin for his heart. She scheduled his doctor's appointments and was present at every single one. And then, in July 2022, my father got sick. He called me on a Tuesday. "Sarah, I'm not feeling well. I think Rebecca's worried about me." "What's wrong?" I asked. "I don't know, nausea, some dizziness, fatigue." He went to his doctor, his regular doctor at Carolina Health Asheville on Hendersonville Road, and they ran a full panel. Everything came back normal, but he continued feeling worse. By August, he'd lost 12 pounds. His hands had a tremor. He was forgetting small things, appointments, conversations from the day before. I drove to Asheville on a Friday and found my father in bed at 2 p.m. Rebecca was downstairs, on her laptop, working on something. My father looked at me, and I felt something ancient and protective wake up inside me. "I'm losing my mind," he said. "You're not," I said, but I didn't actually know that. I asked Rebecca to step outside. We stood in the driveway of the house where I'd grown up, and I said, "When did this start?" "About 6 weeks ago," she said. "I've been wanting to get him to go back to the doctor, but he keeps saying it's stress." The thing about Rebecca is that she sounded genuine. She sounded like a woman who cared. And maybe she did care. Maybe concern and poisoning aren't mutually exclusive. My father went back to his doctor. This time they tested for heavy metals. The results came back positive for thallium. Thallium is a heavy metal used in electronic devices and optical equipment. It's also a poison. The acute symptoms are nausea, tremors, hair loss, and peripheral neuropathy. The chronic exposure symptoms look a lot like early-stage Alzheimer. He was being poisoned. The police became involved. The North Carolina Division of Health and Human Services launched an investigation. An environmental toxicologist was brought in to test the house. They found thallium in the kitchen, specifically in the cabinet where my father's medications were stored, and in the sealed containers of herbal supplements that Rebecca had purchased for him from a supplement distributor in Boone. The thallium concentration was equivalent to approximately 12 micrograms per day, a dose that wouldn't be immediately lethal but would be devastating over months. Cognitive decline, weakness, eventually complete system failure. What interested the investigators, what they told me with very careful language, was the precision of the dosing. Someone wasn't accidentally exposing my father to thallium. Someone was calculating it. Rebecca was arrested on August 19, 2022. She was charged with attempted murder. The bail was set at $150,000. She posted it within 4 hours. Here, what I learned during the investigation. Rebecca's previous employment history included 2 years as a laboratory assistant at Duke University's environmental science program. She knew what she was doing. More than that, she'd researched it. Investigators found her browser history. She'd been reading about thallium toxicity, absorption rates, and symptoms for months before she met my father. She hadn't fallen in love with him at a yoga studio. She'd targeted him. This is the part where I tell you about the moment I understood fully what was happening. It was late August 2022, and I was sitting in the Asheville Police Department with Detective Maria Gonzalez, who'd been assigned to my father's case. She was a woman in her early 50s with gray streaking through her dark hair, and she had the kind of attention to detail that made me feel less alone. "We found financial records," she said, sliding a folder across the desk to me. Inside were bank statements from an offshore account registered in Rebecca's name. In the 18 months she'd known my father, she'd moved $180,000 into that account. The source of the money was unclear. Some of it appeared to be from personal loans she'd opened in my father's name, using forged documentation. She wasn't just poisoning him, she was stealing from him. "How much more?" I asked. "We believe she was planning to accelerate the dozing in September. The medical examiner said another month at the current rate, and your father would have been incapacitated. Another 2 months, and he would have been dead. At that point, as his executor, with the power of attorney documents already in place, she would have had full access to everything." The target was the $2.1 million house, the $847,000 in investment accounts, the $250,000 designated specifically to her in the will, plus the $180,000 she'd already stolen. We're talking about a woman who had a detailed, multi-year plan to marry a widower, poison him into helplessness, gain legal control of his assets, and disappear with approximately $3.27 million. The case went to trial in March 2023. It lasted 4 weeks. Rebecca pled not guilty, arguing that the thallium contamination was accidental, that she'd been negligent in storing supplements but hadn't deliberately poisoned anyone. The defense attorney, a woman named Jennifer Harmon from Raleigh, presented testimony about how thallium contamination could occur through cross-contamination in supplement manufacturing. But the evidence was clear. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Thomas Wheeler, presented my father's medical records, the environmental contamination evidence, the browser history, the financial records, and the testimony of Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, a toxicologist from UNC Chapel Hill, who explained that the precise dosing in my father's system was inconsistent with accidental contamination. On March 31, 2023, Rebecca was found guilty on 2 counts, attempted murder and financial fraud. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The will was invalidated, the power of attorney documents were nullified, and my father slowly got better. It took months. The thallium had to be removed from his body through chelation therapy, a process that involved injecting him with medications that bind to the heavy metal and allow his body to eliminate it. His hair grew back. The tremors stopped. His memory returned, though not completely. He still loses words sometimes. He still has moments where his hands shake. But he's alive. And I learned something during all of this. Something that my quiet, observant nature had been preparing me for my whole life. Justice doesn't happen because people are good. It happens because people pay attention. I noticed the will change. I checked the attorney's credentials. I kept records of my father's health decline. I listened to his voice on the phone and recognized that something was wrong. I was alone in it with Michael in Denver thinking happiness was more important than clarity, and I did it anyway. My father and I don't talk about what Rebecca almost did, not directly. But sometimes he'll be sitting in the living room of that $2.1 million house, the one he still lives in, that will be left to me and Michael in equal share, and he'll turn to me and say, "Thank you for paying attention, Sarah." And I'll say, "That's what I do." Because that's the thing about poisonings and theft and all the quiet cruelties that people inflict on each other. They require observation. They require someone to notice that something's wrong. They require someone to be willing to be the person who says, "This doesn't sit right. Let me check." My father had 6 months of therapy afterward. He struggled with the violation of trust, the way the place where he'd found happiness had been turned into a crime scene. He struggled with the fact that he'd wanted to believe in Rebecca so badly that he'd almost missed the signs. But he survived. And I learned that being the quiet observer, the person who takes notes and notices details, it's not a burden. It's a responsibility. And sometimes, that responsibility is exactly what saves someone's life. Rebecca is currently in federal prison in Butner, North Carolina. She's eligible for parole in 2037. My father no longer wears the ring she gave him. He wears the wedding band my mother gave him in 1970, the year they got married. And I still notice small details. I still take notes. I still wait before I act.